Story 1. I smoked what I call phantom cigarettes. A lot of my addiction was not the bodily craving for nicotine, but more the mental aspect, the oral fixation, and the whole routine. So every time it was my routine to have a cigarette, I went through the entire ritual but without the cigarette. I opened the window, sat up straight at my desk, chewed the mint gum I always did to make the cigarette taste better, and inhaled and exhaled as if I were smoking for a few minutes. When I was done with that, I pretended I just had a cigarette, so I didn't need one now. I don't know. Somehow that tricked my brain into stopping. I was also tired of coughing myself to sleep and having that smell in my apartment. You really need to be fed up with smoking. Story 2. I quit to save money to build a cabin on a piece of land I owned. I never built the cabin, but I quit smoking, and that was 14 years ago. Story 3. My dad took a glass jar, put cigarettes and water in it, and left it in the sun. Whenever he felt like smoking, he would open the jar and smell it. My grandparents used nicotine gum, and that worked for them. My sister quit abruptly. A doctor suggested, "How long does a craving last? 15 minutes? You can make it through 15 minutes." Story 4. Cold turkey. July 24th, 1995. My son had just turned 1, and I wanted to make sure I was there for him. Story 5. Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking book helped me quit within a week. It's not easy, though, and I felt terrible for a while. Story 6. I started vaping with an old-school device where you can go to the shop, and they mix the e-liquid for you while allowing you to choose your desired nicotine content. You can start vaping at levels close to those found in cigarettes and then gradually wean yourself off. I reduced the nicotine content by 20% each time I went for refills. After 6 months, I was vaping nicotine-free. After another 2 months, I stopped vaping entirely. Story 7. Finally reached a breaking point where it became too much of a burden. Constantly having to stop for a fresh pack and going outside in all sorts of weather was overwhelming. The smell lingered. I tried to manage it for 2 days, but that was all I could handle. Story 8. My husband quit 19 months ago using cessation counseling, patches, and gum through his doctor's office. I am proud of him after over 20 years of military service, in which I saw the environment that promotes smoking. I am a veteran, but I have never smoked. Story 9. I took all my nicotine products and put them on the table. I then threw them all away. I am frugal and knew I wouldn't want to reinvest in buying new vapes, cigarettes, or dip. Story 10. To stop smoking, you need to identify the reasons for your addiction. For me, it was the action of holding a cigarette and the ritual of lifting it to my mouth and inhaling. I realized I was not addicted to nicotine or any other substance associated with smoking. I quit by using an electronic cigarette. One day, I forgot it at home when I went to work. I didn't even think about it, and it wasn't until I got home that I realized I didn't need it anymore. I have not smoked since. Sometimes I can still smell cigarettes on other people, and it smells nice at first, but the lingering odor afterwards is unpleasant. I am glad I no longer smell like that. Story 11. I tried to quit a few times. Gum and vaping didn't work for me, but nicotine patches did. I weaned myself off them quickly and never looked back. Story 12. I got a vape, something like an elf. I don't know why this particular type worked while others didn't. I used it for 3 days while driving. I craved a cigarette even though I was getting nicotine from the vape. The cigarettes tasted disgusting when I tried them again after 3 days. A few months later, I mixed the vapes with zero nicotine. It was the same vape, but you could buy it with or without nicotine. Eventually, I only used the zero nicotine vape. One day, I decided to stop vaping. My quitting journey lasted from July to January. I tried vapes for years, both the refillable kind and those that resemble cigarettes. I don't know why this specific type of vape helped me transition away from cigarettes. Story 13. I tapered off over a 6-month period and then quit without any replacements. I quit when I reduced my intake to 2 cigarettes a day. I also worked on my habits. I stopped smoking with coffee, prohibited smoking in my apartment, and avoided smoking while driving. I eliminated those habitual times. It's really hard to quit, so try to figure out what will work for you. This approach worked for me. I have not smoked in a long time, for about 15 to 20 years. Story 14. It became too hot to stay outside during the summer, and smoking made me irritable, so I decided to stop. Story 15. Look at your hand, be aware of it, and control it. Don't allow it to pick up a cigarette, no matter how much your brain wants to. Control your hand. Story 16. I started using filters for a year but later could not smoke without them. I then stopped for a year, started again, and eventually quit. Now it has been 9 years since I quit. The first few weeks were terrible. I didn't meet a single smoker friend for a few months. If they wanted to meet, I invited them to my home. That's how I managed in my initial days. Story 17. The patch and someone to support you. For 8 to 10 weeks, I was on the patch. It works great. I also recommend finding something to keep your hands busy. I would cut straws down to cigarette size and use them all day. I am 1 year tobacco-free. You can do this. Story 18. I switched to vaping. I quit mainly because we were in a difficult financial situation, and I had to move money from groceries to pet food to pay for my cigarettes. It completely disgusted me that I was taking food out of my children's and pets' mouths to support my habit. Over the last nearly 2 years, I've reduced the nicotine content in the vape juice to nearly nothing. I am almost there. My husband recently quit smoking cold turkey. He still uses snus and occasionally has a few puffs from a cigar. We were both smoking about a pack a day. Story 19. Basically, I stopped everything related to smoking. I tried patches, but they didn't really help. I quit going to places where I used to smoke, like having coffee outside on the bench at work. I allowed myself 1 cigarette a day for about a week, starting first thing in the morning, by buying a pack of 10. When that ran out, I stopped completely. When I went to the pub with friends, I might occasionally ask for a cigarette. The moment I knew I had truly quit was when I had a cigarette that made me feel awful. In my opinion, quitting cold turkey is the only effective way. Nicotine replacement just transfers one habit to another, although the latter may be less harmful. And don't get me started on vaping. I have been smoke-free for over 20 years now. Story 20. I found the patch helpful. It made smoking taste very bad. It mostly came down to desire. I knew it was time to let go of my vices and get healthy. I was ready to move on after several brief failed attempts when I clearly was not. Story 21. Willpower. One day I decided that I would no longer allow a cigarette to have that kind of power over me. I can be quite stubborn. Story 22. I started vaping and realized I was addicted to the act, not the nicotine. I stopped about 3 months later. Now I vape cannabis once or twice a week. Story 23. I did everything at once. Gum, online help from the American Lung Association, books, a short-term prescription, straws, toothpicks, and more. One thing I told myself was that I would never take another puff. 18 years later, not one puff. It's really hard but well worth it. Best of luck. Story 24. I couldn't really afford it anymore, but my willpower isn't great. I told myself that if I really wanted one, I would have one, but only if I truly needed it. Each time I would normally smoke, I thought, I'll have one in 10 minutes. Sometimes I did, but mostly I got past that and didn't have one at all. After about a week, I got through a whole day and thought, well, I'm not having one now. The following year was difficult when I went out, as I always smoked more when drinking, but I made it. That was 11 years ago. I still consider myself a smoker who hasn't had one for a while, but I'm not planning on starting again. I notice it most if I get a cold. The accompanying cough now lasts a couple of days instead of a month. Story 25. To stop smoking, you simply need to not smoke. That's what worked for me. I always say I'd love a cigarette, but I don't smoke, so I won't have one. Want a cigarette? No, I don't smoke. Not, I'm trying to quit. Story 26. I just woke up one day and realized I'm too old for that. I also made the same decision about drinking. I was running and biking a lot, but I was still smoking and could feel the harm it was causing. Story 27. I used patches for a few months to break the oral fixation and smoking routines while I slowly weaned off nicotine by lowering the dosage in the patch over time. More importantly, I wanted to quit and felt disgusted by every cigarette I smoked before stopping. Story 28. Nicotine gum and carrying it with me for at least a full year after I quit. Every day I choose to be a non-smoker. Story 29. I smoked for 16 years and wanted to stop. I bought a nicotine vape and used lower nicotine doses for a month. When the vape fell over and broke, I didn't want to spend another $60 on a new device, so that was it. It has been 5 years of willpower since then. Story 30. I don't smoke, but my dad used to. After years, he finally managed to quit. Instead of a cigarette, he used an empty pipe in his mouth to ease the urge to smoke. Now he has come so far that he doesn't need anything anymore. Story 31. I broke my leg and was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I slept and watched the Football World Cup while under medication. I haven't smoked since. Story 32. The best way to stop any addiction is to systematically reduce it one day at a time. For example, if you smoke 10 cigarettes a day, this week you will smoke 9 a day. Next week you will smoke 8 a day, the week after will be 7 a day, and so on until you reach 1 a day. After that, you can stop buying them completely. Depending on your situation, you might need to add or remove weeks as needed. Story 33. I read Alan Carr's book, Easy Way to Quit Smoking. It framed the entire habit in such a way that I stopped thinking of quitting as something I had to do someday to realizing, this is so unnecessary, and I have no desire to voluntarily enter psychological slavery ever again. I can't recommend it enough. I hear ex-smokers say things like, the smell still gets to me sometimes, or I could spark one right now and be fine. But the mindset shift that the book provided me has only ever given me one thought, good riddance. Story 34. I quit smoking cold turkey and read Carr's book 3 times in a row. I still wake up thinking I have folded and smoked, which makes me angry at myself, even though I quit over 10 years ago. So strange. Story 35. I reduced the nicotine content by 0.5% for every batch of e-juice I made. By the time I reached 0% nicotine, I was sick of it. After starting as a 30-cigarette-a-day smoker, I've never looked back. Story 36. For me, it was a long process that required deep introspection and motivation from the thought of potentially leaving my daughter without a father before my time. I started smoking as a young teenager in the early to mid-1980s. I began dating the woman I'm still married to in my 20s, and we eventually moved in together before we married. We both smoked inside our apartment until one day I grabbed a fresh, clean towel after a shower and noticed it smelled like a bar. We agreed to only smoke outside after that, and we adhered to this policy when we bought our first home. We planned to have our child, and my wife quit smoking well before she became pregnant, never to return to it again. I continued to smoke but hid it from our daughter until I finally quit when she was around 7. It bothered me that I kept this secret from her. I began to recognize the automatic triggers that caused me to smoke and slowly started to eliminate those by becoming fully conscious of them. I began buying loose tobacco, filters, and papers and reduced my consumption by rolling my own cigarettes. Then I stopped pre-rolling any so that when I wanted one, I had to make it a conscious effort. I used this time to meditate on why I started in the first place and how I wanted to be free from this habit. I kept a picture of my daughter in my vehicle to remind me of her every time I felt the urge to smoke. One day, I made an appointment for an acupuncture session and happened to have just enough tobacco left for one more cigarette, which I smoked on the way there. After that session, I was done being a smoker after 20 years. I still went through intense psychological withdrawal for over a month. It felt like I was battling an external force that was steering my car into the parking lots of smoke shops. I even bought a pack of cigarettes once but talked myself out of opening them and tossed them in the trash immediately. This was the hardest mental challenge I had to face at that point in my life. I was otherwise very active and healthy. When people learned I was a smoker, they were often surprised because I seemed so health-conscious in every other respect. I have the lungs of an athlete and, 12 years after quitting, showed no evidence that I ever smoked. That was until I had an aortic dissection at age 47 and nearly died. If I hadn't quit when I did, I most likely would not be here typing this. I likely have a connective tissue disorder, And all those years of smoking probably resulted in undiagnosed high blood pressure that led to the formation of an aortic aneurysm, which one day tore inside, separating the layers of my aorta from my heart down into one of my kidneys. There is no definitive cause for this, but it would be hard to argue that smoking had nothing to do with it. Smoking tobacco is one of the worst and most senseless things you can do to yourself. I don't live in regret. I continue forward with what I have. However, if I had the chance to start over, I would not have ever smoked even one cigarette. If you smoke now, quit with all the power and will that you can muster. It's painful at first, but you will get past it relatively quickly and can reach a point where you cannot imagine ever smoking again. It's worth the initial discomfort. Story 37. A particularly nasty strain of influenza confined me to the couch and bathroom for more than a week. After a week of not smoking, I found it easy to continue. The hardest part was over, and I didn't even realize it through the delirium, fever, and difficulty breathing. I was also housebound for an additional week as temperatures were minus 30 degrees, and I didn't want to risk pneumonia by going outside to smoke. I suppose this is based on the decision not to smoke indoors. Story 38. I realized I was turning 40 and needed to improve my health. You really have to want to quit in order to be successful. It has to be cold turkey. I tried many times and failed when I thought I could simply cut back. I did use a zero-nicotine vape for a few weeks, which helped. Story 39. I started experiencing severe gingivitis, and my best friend expressed how upset it made her for me to smoke. The combination of disappointing her and dealing with gingivitis was not worth it, along with other health risks. Story 40. I am currently using a patch, lozenges, and Wellbutrin. I had a heart attack a month ago today, and I am still struggling. I have smoked for 35 years. Story 41. Nicotine patches for 1 month of the maximum strength are used to combat cravings while I work on breaking the habit of smoking. Story 42. I will have one in social settings if offered, but I always make it a point to never seek them out myself. Story 43. I managed to stop without buying or asking for anything. I set myself a goal and celebrated 1 month at a time, enjoying the excitement of receiving a treat at the end of each month. Story 44. One day, I woke up with the inability to take a drag without gagging and almost throwing up. I had not enjoyed smoking for quite a few years. It just tasted unpleasant to me, and I had been wanting to quit but didn't have the willpower. Then one day, when I took a drag, I almost vomited. I thought maybe I was just sick. I tried my wife's menthols, and they did the same thing. I attempted to smoke again for the next few days, but it never went away. It was just an instant gagging upon the first drag. So, I stopped trying and used disposable electronic cigarettes from the gas station. This was just before vaping became popular. I was worried I would become dependent on the electronic cigarettes, so I bought some nicotine patches and followed the program, stopping the use of electronic cigarettes during the last week of the patch treatment. Once the patches were done, so was I. I haven't smoked since. My favorite and least favorite things about the entire experience. I would sleep with the patches on so that I didn't experience nicotine cravings when I woke up. My brain was not used to getting nicotine doses while I slept, so I had the most vivid dreams I have ever had in my life. I would wake up in cold sweats with a heavy heartbeat, thinking to myself, what on earth? I loved it. If I weren't worried about reintroducing nicotine into my system, I would love to sleep with a patch on every now and then just to experience those bizarre dreams again. The only dreams I didn't like were the many dreams in which I could see myself lighting up a cigarette from a third-person view. I would wake up mad at myself for smoking in my dream. Story 45. After numerous unsuccessful attempts to quit smoking abruptly, a severe case of walking pneumonia finally made it clear that I had to choose between smoking and breathing. That was 21 years ago, and I chose breathing. Story 46. Make a plan. Buy a nicotine replacement product. I decreased my smoking in advance of my quit date. I used the nicotine patch and followed the directions. I avoided triggers like drinking. I used carrots, mints, and a quit smoking application. I quit 10 years ago. I had tried to quit 5 times before I was successful. I believe this time worked because I was getting the nicotine, but also because I was mentally ready. I was tired of everything about smoking, the cost, the smell, and the social stigma. I stopped using the patch when I was on the last step, and I forgot to put one on and didn't notice until the end of the day. Story 47. For me, I took it slowly, just to get used to the feeling of not smoking. It is uncomfortable, but it challenged me to endure the feeling for longer periods. Eventually, I got used to it. However, I started smoking again, not for the drug itself, but for the enjoyment it brought. I really liked smoking, especially the social aspect, and it helped fill the time when I felt bored and needed something to do. I've gone back and forth with smoking, able to quit whenever I wanted for as long as I wished. I have been smoke-free for 1 year now, my second time maintaining such a long period. It is mentally challenging, and in my opinion, supplements are ineffective. Mental strength is all that is needed and much cheaper. Good luck, my friend. It is worth it to quit. Story 48. I just stopped. I smoked American Spirits and told myself if they cost $10 a pack, I would quit. They did, so I did. Story 49. Patches and the knowledge that if I continued, I would eventually choke on my own sputum and die by suffocation, curled up in a little ball on some hospital gurney. I have witnessed this process 3 times, and I do not want to see it ever again. It is far more horrific than you think. Story 50. I attended a class about 30 years ago, from Monday to Saturday. If you were not satisfied on Saturday, you did not have to pay. I paid and have not smoked since then. The main takeaway was that the number of cigarettes you were smoking at the beginning of the class was your minimum, in my case, 3 packs a day. When you wanted a cigarette, you were advised not to think about having just one, but rather to return to your minimum. That was a significant factor in my success. Story 51. At first, I switched from cigarettes to cigars and a smoking pipe, but after a while, I replaced them with a vape. I know it's not a complete quit, but at least I feel better. Story 52. I quit drinking over 8 years ago. 2 years after that, and after a few failed attempts, I had my last cigarette on April 1st, 2018. I used vapes, which I disliked but needed for a nicotine fix, for 6 months as a sort of pacifier, and then I gradually stopped. Pick a date and commit to it. Keep quitting even if you stumble. Quitting cigarettes was harder for me than quitting alcohol. Good luck. You can do this. Story 53. I started smoking fewer cigarettes and leaving longer gaps between each one. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't a smoker anymore. Story 54. I went from a pack a day to being a social smoker. One night, I went out with some friends, had 2 drinks, and smoked several cigarettes. When I got home, I felt very ill. That was enough for me. It has been over 30 years since my last cigarette. Story 55. Champix. 8 years ago, I was smoking 1.5 packs of cigarettes a day. 14 weeks later, I couldn't stand the smell of cigarettes, let alone smoke one. It made me gag. It's the most amazing pill. I haven't touched or wanted a cigarette since. This was done through the National Health Service in the UK after exploring all other available options. I'm not sure how it works now. Story 56. My mom used to smoke a pack a day and tried quitting many times over the years, using everything from patches and gum to hypnotism. She managed to quit for 6 months at one point but relapsed one day. A few months ago, I gave her 2 vape devices. One with nicotine and one without. The one with nicotine was too harsh for her, so she started using the one without until she gradually used it less and then completely stopped. She hasn't smoked a cigarette or vape in over 6 months now. Story 57. It took me reaching a point of convincing myself that I truly hated smoking. Without that realization, I would have relapsed. I got really sick, which gave me a 4-day head start on quitting. My lungs were in such bad shape that I was on so much medication I didn't experience cravings during that time. That was a significant advantage. I began to find replacement behaviors. Whenever I felt an urge, I would do curls or engage in some other positive activity. Story 58. I was smoking about a pack a day. I switched to a vape, and every few weeks I lowered the nicotine content until eventually it reached 0. I continued to use the vape for a few weeks after that, but it gradually tapered off. Story 59. Switched to cannabis and stopped smoking cigarettes. I also stopped using other drugs, as many are not physically addictive. Story 60. I quit my job, moved back in with my parents, and ran out of money. It worked out okay, but I wouldn't recommend it. Story 61. I switched to cigarette vapes and later realized how silly they are. However, it helped me because I had something to hold in my hand. There was a time I was really sick for a week and didn't start again. Now I absolutely hate the smell. Story 62. I stopped smoking when I started working remotely. I enjoyed having multiple breaks during the day, and it was convenient to remember to pick up cigarettes while filling my car with gas. I don't smoke in my house, and I'm not going to leave just to buy cigarettes or vape juice. Story 63. I weaned myself off them. I started with something easily achievable. No smoking while driving. After I was comfortable with this new limitation, I began delaying smoking. When I felt like having a cigarette, I would set a 1-hour alarm to postpone smoking. After getting used to this, my daily intake decreased. My next step was to take only 5 cigarettes to the office each day. I had to smoke them strategically, knowing I would run out if I got greedy. Finally, after adjusting to only a few per day, I decided not to buy any more and enjoyed my final pack. Story 64. The biggest thing for me was getting diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and having stimulants prescribed so I didn't need the stimulant effect of nicotine to concentrate. There were many other factors mentioned by others, but the top priority was addressing the attention deficit disorder. This also allowed me to reduce my caffeine intake. Story 65. Nicorette cherry lozenges were more effective for me, and the Walmart brand was cheaper. I have tried patches, quitting cold turkey, and electronic cigarettes, but these lozenges worked like magic. Story 66. I just put it down. I never did it again. It's been 12 years. 6 months ago, I started using e-cigarettes. I put that down too. I threw all my devices away. I made the decision and I stuck with it. Story 67. I quit smoking abruptly after discovering a small lump in my neck, which feels like burning every time I smoke. I became scared that I could end up dead and leave my 1-year-old and 5-year-old behind. A few years ago, I attempted smoking nicotine-free cigarettes from Holland and Barrett. I also tried lozenges and a patch. Story 68. I got pneumonia and decided not to smoke during my illness. For some reason, I didn't crave it anymore. I don't suggest this method, but it worked for me. Story 69. I am starting to quit smoking weed. I see it as a waste of money. Cannabis should be treated as an occasional treat for special occasions. I am saving money every day for a better future. Story 70. The doctor prescribed pills. I had tried everything else, but most importantly, I needed the right motivation. Not being able to afford it just isn't enough. Story 71. I just quit. I never smoked a lot, but only when I was home alone or when someone offered me a cigarette. I quit because it didn't add much value for me. Story 72. Long story short, I quit cold turkey while my wife used the nicotine patch. It will be 9 years this July or around that time. Story 73. I accidentally caught a bacterial infection that was treated with complex antibiotics, which made me feel so unwell that I laid on the couch for 9 days, semi-delirious and confused, without knowing whether I was experiencing withdrawal, illness, or reactions to the medication. By the time I returned to normal, I didn't even crave cigarettes. I can sit with smokers without any problem and do not experience any symptoms of quitting, other than the occasional dream about it. I am nearly 2 years smoke-free now, after trying for years to quit using willpower alone. I believe the medication changed my brain chemistry in some way. Feels like someone flipped a switch in my head. Story 74. I stopped abruptly, but I always had something in my mouth. I was 21 and used mints, candy, straws, anything to fill that void. The habit of having something in my mouth was the hardest part. I never looked back, and that was 40 years ago. A glass jar to visualize the money saved is also a great idea. Good luck. Story 75. I smoked less than the day before. I had some setbacks, but each setback involved fewer cigarettes than I would have typically smoked. I started counting the days I was smoke-free. After a couple of setbacks, Restarting the count frustrated me, so I decided to quit for good. If I were to quit again now, I would focus on the money saved, putting all or even half of the amount I would have spent into savings or to pay down debt. I would ensure that the money was put to good use. Story 76. You have to genuinely want to quit, as if your life depends on it. When you finally wake up and realize it truly does, you will use any method necessary, for as long as it takes, to quit. I would not recommend vaping, however. I used patches and nicotine gum. It took time to break the cigarette habit, and I chewed nicotine gum for a long time. Eventually, I weaned myself off that with cinnamon gum. I haven't smoked in about 15 years after having a pack-a-day habit for about 20 years. Story 77. I didn't, but I can right now if you want. I am low on tobacco with only a couple of packs left, around 30 cigarettes. So drawing down might be easy because I pushed myself pretty far. I have a strong impulse, so I could quit cold turkey from 2 pounds, around 800 cigarettes a month, to nothing overnight if I set my mind to it correctly. Story 78. Never started is how I never had to quit. I smoke cannabis like a horse, though. Try smoking cannabis to quit smoking. It's like a miracle cure. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.